Hello and welcome to the CIBSE West Midlands Region CPD webinar on Hydrogen CHP by Martin Kenzie of 2G. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Martin for your time and contribution today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us. Before we get started, just a few bits I'd like to mention. Details of future events can be found via our Eventbrite page, which I'll put in the chat shortly. Feedback for today's event can be provided by emailing feedback@cibsewm.org, and please use the chat function for any questions or comments. CPD certificates will be automatically sent to the email address used to register for today. So on with today's event. Today's presentation is focusing on the development 2G have done over 10 years running CHPs with 100% hydrogen. It covers the technical changes they've made to the engine design to enable hydrogen running, the projects that they've delivered, the sources of hydrogen, and the environmental benefits from fuel switching are also covered. Today's speaker, Martin Kenzie, graduated from Liverpool University with a degree in electronics with specialism in power systems back in 1991. 2G Energy UK sales manager, focusing on hydrogen scaling up of the UK market and the fuel switching for engines. Having previously worked for multinational corporations and the big six energy firms, he also worked on power generation projects for over 25 years across the globe, covering everything from small scale generation to energy from waste projects. Having worked with many renewable technologies and renewable fuels from biogas, biodiesels and pure plant oils. An advocate for hydrogen and the role it can have in decarbonising our workplaces and homes. Martin, thank you very much, and we look forward to sharing with you what you have today.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thanks for that great introduction. It's probably actually you sound like me. So if I just give you the quick background of the company, we're probably the largest engineering or engine manufacturing company that most people have never even heard of. I said, strange enough, before I started working for them 5 or 6 years ago, I'd never heard of them. And they're obviously just based down the road from my house. We're actually a northwest German company, so all our manufacturing is over in Heek, in the northwest of Germany. We're actually up by the Dutch border. In the UK, we're obviously the sales and service division. Pretty much, I said, we've got a massive obviously manufacturing and industrial complex over in Germany, and we're generally building about 800, 900 engines a year. We've got about 8,500 operational units pretty much all over the world. We've got an incredible basic focus on research and development, and more than 10% of all the company are actually in the R&D teams. So we've got about 850 of us working worldwide, 92 are in research and development. So obviously we like to keep ahead of the technology developments and everything else, but it's also one of the reasons why we have so many engineering innovations when it comes to obviously designing the engines, just because we've just got a strong focus from the CEO all the way down about obviously making sure obviously we keep technology competitiveness. So just a little background. We're not ever saying that obviously CHP is the only solution, obviously for the decarbonisation, obviously going forward. We see it obviously playing a part, obviously direct renewables, electricity, obviously from the wind farms, PV, etc. Obviously battery storage, and obviously even certain applications, obviously where heat pumps and everything else fit into it. But we see CHP, and especially obviously hydrogen-enabled CHP, or hydrogen running CHP, it's been one of the fundamental blocks for obviously how the energy system can develop in the future. And I'm going to explain later obviously about how we can actually utilise effectively an awful lot of this technology that's embedded and on the ground already. So basically the background of obviously how we do all this, how we make the engines run 100% hydrogen. So typically most obviously turbocharged engines, we have a gas mixer on it, and we're combining obviously the air, obviously the gases, obviously to the mixer, but obviously before we put it through a turbocharger, and obviously that turbocharged gas mix then obviously we put into the engines and obviously run. So that's how pretty much all standard so obviously turbocharged engines work. One of the issues that we've got with hydrogen, and this was something else, obviously, developments works that we were doing in different fields. Obviously, hydrogen's obviously quite weak, obviously, for the calorific value of it compared to obviously natural gas or some of the biogases we work with. But obviously, the massive advantage is obviously it's got no carbon in it. So obviously that's got huge advantages. One of the disadvantages we also have of hydrogen, which we can feed onto exactly why we're doing this in the first place. Hydrogen's got a lower auto detonation temperature or lower auto ignition temperature, obviously compared to natural gas, and that obviously causes us some concerns. Obviously, when we're doing obviously putting obviously high percentages of hydrogen through obviously an air mix and obviously then through a turbocharger. What we actually found is originally we were designing a lot of engines that were running with syngases, and some of the syngases have got obviously like 40–50% concentration of hydrogen in them. And what we actually found is at the time, if we were going to start putting more than 50% hydrogen through a turbocharger, obviously because of the lower detonation temperature of hydrogen, we were approaching the auto detonation temperature. Obviously the hydrogen. So what we effectively developed was anytime we were going to be using concentrations of hydrogen higher than 40%, we effectively developed a bypass system. So anytime we up to 40% hydrogen, there's no issues at all. But anytime we were using concentrations of hydrogen higher than 40%, we bypass the gas, obviously from the gas mixer, and we still turbocharge the air. And then what we do is we then reintroduce, obviously through an injection port, the hydrogen back into the turbocharged air, obviously just in front of obviously the combustion chambers. As I said, this was originally something we were developing obviously for syngases. Then about 11 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that, the German government approached us and asked us if we could design obviously 100% hydrogen running engine as part of their demonstration project, which was obviously done at Berlin Airport. So in reality, we had the technology already there, and so in essence, all we really did was we effectively just retuned the engine from running 40–50% hydrogen up to running with 100% hydrogen. The injection valves, the timing, and everything else, as I said, we'd already come up with the system already anyway. So in essence, it was just a case of doing obviously retuning and effectively just making the engine run on 100% hydrogen. So it didn't actually really take us that long to do it. And the simple way that we do it, once again, I said we just obviously add these injector valves. So obviously we put obviously one injector valve in, obviously each of the cylinders. And I said that then we obviously just inject, obviously normally about 5 bar. So we do 5 bar injection back into the turbocharged air, basically straight in front of the inlet valves, and that's effectively what we do to make the engines run on hydrogen. So it's not a massive, obviously, change in technology or anything else. It's really, as I said, it's just overcoming this sort of issue with the, as I said, the auto detonation temperature of hydrogen. That I said we just bypass the turbocharger and obviously we then do the port injection. The advantage that this system or this sort of technique that we've developed are doing this, 99% of the engine is obviously the standard core base engine. And I said the only thing we have to add to it, I said, is obviously this injector system. Obviously, there's a bit of play around, obviously, with the timing and the compression ratios and everything else. But actually, for physical modifications to the engine, it really is just adding this one injector system. What the advantage of this system is obviously we can actually upgrade effectively all of the engines obviously that we've got existing now. So any engines that are running on natural gas, obviously we just have the conventional gas mixer on it. We can come to site and we can obviously install obviously the injection rail onto the cylinder heads and effectively convert the engine over from running effectively natural gas or biogas into running 100% hydrogen. And we've done this before. I mean, as you can see in this picture here, obviously this is an upgraded engine, which is obviously already still got the conventional gas mixer on it. And then obviously we've added the hydrogen injection line onto it to obviously enable the engine to run on 100% hydrogen. It's also got an awful lot of advantages. There's some of the sites that we work on, because obviously the fluctuating hydrogen supply, sometimes because obviously a lot of the sites obviously generate hydrogen at night, obviously from the excess wind farms. But if they haven't got enough hydrogen or the hydrogen has been sold for a different obviously commercial purpose, we can still obviously run the engines on natural gas. This came into effect obviously when obviously some of the district heating schemes in Germany, if obviously the hydrogen hasn't been available but they still need the heat to go into the swimming pools and the schools, etc., we can either blend blend natural gas into whatever hydrogen they've got, or effectively run the engine on 100% natural gas. So effectively, these engines can have obviously dual fuel mixing lines, and then effectively it can run on anything. It can run 100% natural gas, 100% hydrogen, and effectively any type of gas mixtures in between. It also, because the upgrade is effectively, I mean, it takes us generally about a week on site, so we don't even need to pull the engine if we're converting it over to 100% hydrogen. And it's what we're telling people. I said, even if hydrogen's not available now locally at site, if you haven't got obviously a hydrogen, obviously supplier of hydrogen production, at some point over the lifetime of the engine, which can obviously be lasting 15, 20 years, as soon as you have the hydrogen available, we can come back to site, we can fit the injection upgrade system, and you can obviously then the engine will be running on 100% hydrogen. So you haven't actually lost all of the embedded value of having the engine and the installation and everything else. The engine can be there, it can be paid for, and everything else now, obviously, because the differentials of the amount of cash, obviously, you make from CHPs, and at any point in time over that lifespan of the engine, at any point in time, you can come and you can have the hydrogen, obviously, injection system fitted to it. So it's not a case of thinking, well, have we got to pick a technology now that we're going to be placing bets on over the 15, 20 years? Effectively, you can place the bet, obviously, of having the natural gas version of the engine now, make all the financial benefits from it, knowing full well that the asset's paid for itself. Then as soon as you need that asset to be obviously running on hydrogen, and then obviously effectively 100% carbon zero, as soon as you get the fuel, we can make the change to the engine, and away you go. So once again, I said there's some issues obviously with hydrogen, obviously because the energy density is obviously not as high as obviously that compared to natural gas or something else. But once again, I said all of this, the controls, the flows, the volume metrics, and everything else, all of this is obviously just normally done obviously with the tuning and the setup of the engine as soon as obviously we've done the conversion of it. One of the obviously the disadvantages of hydrogen is obviously its really combustible nature, which is obviously why we have to obviously go bypassing the turbochargers and everything else. But one of the great advantages of hydrogen, it's really, really combustible. And what this gives is it's got a huge operational control window of where we can mix obviously the air-fuel ratio between the air and the fuel and still have the fuel detonate obviously inside the cylinder heads. Obviously, it's a bigger control window compared to obviously natural gas or methane or natural gas or something like that. And what this does is, so originally when we did the first project in Berlin Airport, because at the time we were basing it on the German biogas specifications, we had the engine running at 500 NOx, which obviously was the regulations at the time. Since then, we've effectively just increased the air-fuel ratio, we've increased the lambda value of the engines. So all the hydrogen engines now are running at 95 milligram NOx. And once again, so we decreased it from 500 down to 95 just by increasing the air-fuel ratio. So we're running the engines now generally about lambda 3.5, compared to obviously what we're running on natural gas. So once again, it's just this perception in industry that if you're burning hydrogen, you have incredibly obviously high NOx levels. In reality, the NOx issues is an easy thing to deal with just by, as I said, increasing the air-fuel ratio mixture. So typically now we're running the engines, obviously when we're running obviously pure hydrogen at about 28 to 1. 28 obviously units of air compared to obviously 1 unit of hydrogen going into it. And once again, it's purely mostly because of the combustible nature of hydrogen. So once again, so as well as zero carbon outputs obviously from running hydrogen, you also get the lower obviously NOx levels as well. We know we could actually push the NOx levels down even further from either two different ways. Either obviously with increasing the, once again, the lambda value, the air-fuel ratio mixture, but then we might be in a point where we might start eating into the power outputs of the engines. At 95 milligrams, we know it had no detrimental power output decrease, but also it was the Clean Air Act. And the other thing that we've been playing around with at various times over the years, it was doing obviously direct injection of oxygen into the engine, because obviously typically a lot of the electrolyzers that we're working with on the projects, we're generally producing 8 times more oxygen than we are hydrogen. So once again, I said we've played around, obviously doing the oxygen injection into the engine. And obviously, if it's got no nitrogen compound in it, obviously there's no NOx. But then obviously a lot of things happened all at the same time. So COVID happened, and obviously there was huge demands, obviously for oxygen. within obviously the NHS and various things. And so all of a sudden, the oxygen had a commercial value beyond obviously wanting to go into the engines. But once again, there's still a whole lot of things we're still playing around within the research and development, all about effectively trying to obviously zero out all of the emissions from the engines, not from just carbon point of view, obviously, but from the nitrous oxides point of view as well. So once again, because all the hydrogen versions of our engines have been commercially available for over 10 years. So this isn't something like that we've just created on a whiteboard and we've said, yes, we think it's going to do this at some point in the future. So we've been commercially selling these engines all over the world for 10 years. So we have everything from the 4-cylinder all the way up to our 20-cylinder, all the versions available in either natural gas, biogas, but also the 100% hydrogen versions of the engines. So you can either have them delivered directly out to the factory already with the injection systems and everything else fitted for the hydrogen enablements, or I said at any point in time you can say, okay, we'll have the standard engine, and at some point as soon as we need upgrading, we'll obviously get the upgrade kit fitted to it. So it's not something that's at some point in the future. I said we've been doing this already. I said we've got 35 projects all over the world over the last 10 years, all running 100% hydrogen. So it is commercially available now. So I said it's not just a pipe dream, it's here already. And once again, so because obviously we said we do an awful lot of trials and testing and performance, obviously logging into the factory. Effectively, once we run hydrogen operation, there's not really any sort of change in obviously overall efficiency of the systems at all. The only thing that we actually do at the moment when we're running on hydrogen operation or 100% hydrogen operation, we're effectively at the moment derating the engines by 25%. And the reason we do that, so our 1 megawatt unit, when we're running on natural gas, when we're running on 100% hydrogen, we're running at 750 kilowatts. It's a strategic decision by the company in a certain way, because hydrogen obviously has no knock resistance, so it's quite easy to obviously get the timing and the compression wrong and obviously get an early detonation knocking on the engine. So obviously we took the decision this while the hydrogen engines are effectively in their infancy, even though we've got 10 years experience in them, just to make sure none of the projects around the world get any sort of bad press from obviously knocking on the engine or the engine running with issues. We effectively took the decision to derate the engines 25%. But that's only at the moment. Obviously, in the next year or so, obviously the production facilities over in Germany are going to be on a dedicated hydrogen pipeline. And then obviously we're going to be having the engines in test beds 24 hours a day running operational hydrogen as opposed to the bottles. And the engineering department pretty much know in the next year or so will sign off the engines on the hydrogen output is exactly the same as natural gas. I mean, on the test cells, we've already had the hydrogen versions of the engine running at the same and actually at higher power output than the natural gas versions. So we know it's all possible. As I said, it's just finally nailing down the last parts of the timing and the compression, and then effectively their power outputs will increase to exactly the same as natural gas. It's just at the moment, as I said, because we take a very conservative view in this. So I said we have projects all over the world. So the project we did over in Berlin Airport was the first one. Obviously, that was the one that was backed for by the German government, where they wanted to effectively prove that we could generate hydrogen. And then since then, I mean, all the initial projects we were doing were obviously all based in Germany, with us being a German company. We obviously, so Apex, Absford, Eslington, they're all in Germany. And then obviously, then the further ones we started going outside of Germany, we did a project over Siemens in Dubai, which was part of the World Expo 2020 or 2021, and then obviously the UK's first one. We've got the project up in Kirkwall Airport, up in Orkney, which is part of the European Marine Energy Centre development, also the hydrogen strategy. And obviously at the moment now, our biggest customer is Japan. At the moment, probably half of all the engines being ordered with the hydrogen version are going directly into Japan. But obviously the first one we had was obviously in the main Toyota manufacturing sites over there. So this is obviously the Berlin Airport one we did with Total. This was effectively the German government's demonstration project to prove you could obviously use the excess power from the wind farms through the electrolyzers and do low pressure, low temperature hydrogen storage on site. It's also where they started doing the trialling of the hydrogen injection, obviously back onto the German gas grid. Obviously, we did the engines for it, and then effectively, obviously, all of the fleet vehicles and everything else on the airport were going to be hydrogen fuel cell cars. So once again, it was just a a way of looking to see that you could actually join up all the technologies together, and effectively it could work. And I think it worked quite well. So effectively that was the first foray we had into it. So actually, this is the exact, as I said, engine that obviously is over in Berlin Airport. So once again, this was based on our 3rd series of engines. We're on our 4th series of engines now. And one of the only slight changes that we made in between the 3rd and the 4th series, when we were on the 3rd series, anytime we wanted to upgrade the engine, obviously to the 100% hydrogen version, we needed to put in a new cylinder liner and a new piston head. So obviously just so none of the material suffered from hydrogen embrittlement. As soon as we moved to our 4th series of engines, which was a couple of years ago, we took the decision then that all the components, the cylinder liners, the piston heads and everything else would all have the same hydrogen ready materials made, so nothing would suffer obviously from embrittlement from the day go. And we effectively made that decision because we know at some point pretty much all the engines that we're selling on the natural gas versions, at some point over the course of their lifetime, they'll get converted to run with obviously high percentages or 100% hydrogen. So once again, as I said, we took that commercial decision. So now, anytime we're obviously doing the upgrades on the site, but it's only the injection system now that we need to add to the system. So this was the project we did over in Dubai. This was at the time one of the nicest running projects we had. It was connected obviously to the largest PV farm in the world at the time. And once again, so whereas all the other projects we actually generate hydrogen during the night from the excess wind, this was actually strangely the other way around. We actually generate hydrogen obviously all throughout the day, obviously using a Siemens electrolyzer, and obviously that provides obviously all the fuel for the engine to be running. And this is actually a tri-generation scheme because as you can imagine, over in Dubai, there was no need for the heat, but obviously the use of the cooling, obviously from the absorption coolers, was quite handy. It's obviously that was just obviously the simple schematic of how the project looked over in Dubai. This is the project that we did down in Bavaria. This is Hapsford. This is the project we actually won all the design awards for, and the CHP projects of the year and everything else, etc., etc., etc. So once again, Hapsford had this thing where it's a little, obviously, town, obviously down in Bavaria. And they obviously wanted to be obviously a carbon zero town, so they started building out more and more wind farms surrounding it to feed the town. But it got to the stage where they had 200% wind availability compared to power output, and then at night that was causing issues, obviously with grid stabilisation and everything else. So they actually took the decision to actually put the electrolyser actually onto the project to do grid balancing. So obviously the production of hydrogen at night is effectively just to stabilise the grid. One of the things that they can also do in Germany, which we can't do over here at the moment, you're allowed to sell your hydrogen, obviously through the injection back onto the gas grid. So Hapsford sell their hydrogen to Greenpeace. So Greenpeace buy what they effectively call wind gas, which is obviously the hydrogen, in essence, in the same way that we obviously can do the RGGOs and the biogas in the UK. And so once again, the idea is it's still a Siemens electrolyzer. So if they've either the commercial value of the hydrogen means that they've either sold it all to Greenpeace, or they haven't generated enough hydrogen for one reason or the other to obviously power their unit, we can obviously run this still on natural gas. So once again, this is one that's got those dual fuel gas mixes on it, where it can effectively run on pretty much any type of fuel. But once again, so we quite like that. Once again, it was just a demonstration that you could actually effectively use obviously renewable power at night, then rather than effectively turning the turbines out the wind, actually just use it just to produce hydrogen. So produce hydrogen all throughout the night and effectively utilise it during the day. This was one of the projects that we also did over in Germany. This was effectively the world's first, obviously, district heating scheme that was running on a hydrogen engine. So it's a university campus. So effectively, they wanted to obviously decarbonise the campus, and so obviously, as well as obviously all the other technologies that they had obviously connected onto it, obviously the batteries and obviously all the charging points and everything else, they put obviously on the small little electrolyser and obviously feeding the engine. And once again, the engine's mainly obviously producing obviously all the heat, there being a district heating network. And once again, I said it worked well, obviously just running on 100% hydrogen. So they were quite comfortable with running CHPs already anyway. And so once again, the only sort of change for them really was obviously the fuel going into the CHP, the infrastructure, the engines, they understood exactly all how it worked. It really was just a change in the fuel. And so once again, it's one of the things we tell people with the amount of abundance of district heating schemes of obviously all over the world. They've got the engines, they've got the infrastructure, everything's there already. All you effectively have to do is make a small little modification to the engine, then just get hold of the hydrogen, and then away you go. Things will then obviously effectively become carbon zero. So this is the project we did up in Kirkwall Airport. This is also a slight difference to the standard other projects that we've done. I said all the others, we've got the electrolyzers on site, obviously generate the hydrogen locally through the storage then into the engine. The one we did up in Orkney, it's actually got an ICM electrolyzer, but the electrolyzer is actually on the island of Ede, and it's actually connected to obviously all the tidal turbines. So it's where it's effectively where they do all the marine testing. So that's why we did it with the Marine Energy Centre. So this is the only one, the actual hydrogen gets delivered to the airport in pressurised tube trailers. It actually comes in on a passenger ferry. So once again, this is to actually just proves, rather than actually having localised hydrogen on site, if you have a delivery system set up, you can actually obviously hydrogen delivered. Because in essence, the engine doesn't care. We don't care really where it comes from, as long as we get like 4 to 10 bar on the gas inlet. I said downstream, whether it's a direct pipe, direct hydrogen storage, or I said tube trailers getting delivered and swapped over. So it makes no difference to us. Hydrogen's hydrogen, so we just need to get hold of it. People always ask us, is there any sort of like major differences once we've converted the engine over to run on hydrogen compared to the standard natural gas or biogas system? In reality, it's exactly the same. Like I said, it's 99% the standard engine. The only thing, obviously, which obviously requires a small bit of maintenance, is actually the injection system, the injectors. But apart from that, there's no other real major differences, obviously, between a standard engine and an engine running on hydrogen. One of the only things that we do like, because obviously a lot of the service intervals nowadays are based on operational oil life. Years ago, it used to be based on spark plug life. So that's traditionally engines were getting serviced every 1,000 hours. But since obviously spark plugs now are lasting 4,000 hours, most of the service intervals now are based on the 2,000 hours, the operational life of the oil. But what we've been finding is, because there's no carbon actually into the fuel source, because obviously it's just pure hydrogen, the oil stays a lot cleaner, obviously because there's no carbon to obviously to pollute the oil. So what we're thinking at the moment now is with the various oil sampling and everything else that we've got happening, at some points we'll probably be increasing the service interval costs and the service intervals of the hydrogen engines to 4,000 hours as opposed to 2,000 hours. So once again, if we increase or if we effectively double the service regime or the amount of time down the engine's going to have, operational uptime, financial savings, carbon saving, everything increases, obviously, by us only effectively needing to service the engine once every 6 months, compared to what it originally used to be once every month. So it all sounds great. So it's always like, what's the big problem at the moment? Well, the big problem at the moment is either getting hold of the hydrogen or effectively the cost of the hydrogen. I mean, originally I wrote these slides about 5 years ago, so 12p a cost for hydrogen at the time was dramatic. At the moment now, it's only about twice the cost of what natural gas will be. But one of the things, obviously, non-renewable no renewable technology works initially, obviously without obviously subsidies of some form or the other. But obviously now, obviously we've had the CFDs going on to hydrogen generation. I think we can obviously start seeing the cost over the next couple of years of hydrogen, the availability, but also the cost of hydrogen coming down. And in reality, that is just the pure and utter bottleneck at the moment. It's just being able to get hold of hydrogen, or getting hold of hydrogen, and obviously a reasonable cost. But I think in the next couple of years, with all development programs that are coming on, obviously HyNet, the East Coast Development Cluster, Grange, the Acorn Project and Grangemouth, the 5100, High, the amount of hydrogen development programs going on at the moment, I think the landscape over the next 5 years is going to change quite dramatically. Obviously, the availability of hydrogen. And so once again, I said it was just obviously the conversion points. Where at some point where you're going to think, okay, are we going to make that switch if the commercially available hydrogen's there at the right type of price? Will we do obviously the switch effectively from going from natural gas to hydrogen? Once again, I said it's all possible. And I said, yeah, you can just obviously take your time to obviously decide obviously when the time is right to make that switch. This is quite important. So when we talk to an awful lot of people, and I said over the last 3 weeks, I've had 1,000 people around the engine, because obviously we've had the hydrogen engine on tour. People are always saying, "Oh, well, we know the gas grid at some point is obviously going to get 20% volume hydrogen into it." But that's the thing. People talk about volume percentages, not obviously energy density. So people think, "Oh, well, if we get 20% hydrogen volume in the natural gas grid, we're going to get a 20% carbon reduction in our processes and everything else." And it isn't right. Effectively, 20% volume hydrogen is actually only going to give you an 8% carbon reduction, obviously because of the calorific values of obviously the different gases. A pint of hydrogen is not worth the same as a pint of natural gas. So that's the one thing I would point out that people need to be aware of. It's the volumetric 20% that people talk about, not 20% kilowatts, because a kilowatt would be a kilowatt. My brother said volumetrics is completely different. So if people are thinking, "Oh, you're going to get a 20% carbon reduction from this 20% hydrogen," you won't. You're going to get an 8% one. It's not until you start eating into the higher percentages, 70, 80, 90, 100% hydrogen, that you obviously really start obviously eating in the mass carbon reductions that you can get obviously from running the technology. And in conclusions, and I said I skipped through this quite quickly because once again, it's a standard engine with an injector. People are always asking us effectively what would be the comparison between us and obviously a standard engine and obviously fuel cells. The biggest thing is the fuel quality. Obviously, at the moment, fuel cells need 99.99999% purity. They need 5 nines purity. For us, that's no issues at all. I mean, obviously, we have design engines for syngas, biogases, wood gases. Hydrogen's quite a lovely gas, so we don't need that high level of purity. So we can even take obviously impurities into the gas streams. One of the advantage that has is because obviously how hydrogen is produced. So normally a standard electrolyzer, a first stage electrolyzer, might produce hydrogen at say 97% purity, which for us is perfect. So we don't care about that. But to get that extra 0 or a little bit percentage of purity to make a fuel cell work, you normally need obviously then cryogenic separation on the back end of it. But once again, I said if you don't need that extra part, just because you don't need to add that 5 nines purity, it makes the electrolyzers cheaper, and it also makes obviously the cost of the hydrogen cheaper. One of the other advantages that we've obviously got with engines is obviously we can load ramp the engine. So we obviously have the engine following the load on the side. It'll go up and down to match it accordingly, as the engines have been designed over the last 10, 15 years to do. Fuel cells don't really like doing that. Fuel cells really want to be effectively a constant power output all the time. They don't like obviously varying the loads quite well. But apart from that, I mean, I said that's pretty much it. I said it's not a whole lot of rocket science or anything else that we've done to make these engines run on hydrogen. It really is a case of it's a simple adoption. It's bypassing the turbocharger. It's effectively just injecting the hydrogen rather upstream of the turbocharger. You can just inject it downstream of the turbocharger, and effectively that's it. That's how you can effectively change or modify engines to run on hydrogen quite easily. And once again, I said there's thousands and thousands and thousands of these things installed. I mean, every hospital's got one. All the universities have got them. They've all got massive carbon targets. Well, it's dead simple. Rather than throwing it all away and trying to buy massive heat pumps and all the rest of it. I mean, if the NHS switched off all the CHPs tomorrow, it's going to cost them about $500 million in the first year. Well, all the kit's been paid for. Put hydrogen into it. There you go. Your carbon target. I mean, the CHPs are doing like 80-90% primary power. Put them on hydrogen. There's 80-90% of the carbon target disappeared overnight. The remaining 10% electrify it. Simple. Yeah, I'm a very simple person, and that's basically it.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that. Really interesting, really thought-provoking and challenging, you know, for what we need to be doing in today's modern world. As I said at the start, if anybody's got any questions or comments or queries, please use the chat function or get in contact with Martin direct. His contact details will be available in the bios of the various platforms on social media and Eventbrite and various other places. I'm just going to pop in the chat function the link to our Eventbrite page. So if anybody wants to join us on any future event, then there's a link there. But for now, I think everybody, just speaking on behalf of everybody, thank you very much, Martin and 2G, for sharing what you have today. And we look forward to seeing what the future holds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you all very much, and have a good rest of the day.
Cheers, everyone.